So, Todd, this was was there a starting point you had in mind?
No, the evolution was really just looking at some coaches that I was working with at Coast, and especially coaches of lower level teams that would observe the one teams in the club and watch those practices and say, those kids are so motivated. And it led me to think about, okay, well, what can I do to help these coaches when they have kids that maybe aren't quite as motivated as the kids who are going to go play volleyball in college and have a target out in front of them.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting because this will be the first, if I have a good memory on this, I think this will be the first time we have a conversation that's really mainly focused on youth players. Not to say the other ones couldn't have applied to youth coaching, but when you're talking about college players or professional players, yeah, like you said, motivation is not probably a major issue. Okay, maybe on a day-to-day basis, they're up and down, but you're not having to worry about a 16-year-old going, okay, are they going to turn up today, or am I going to have to bring the energy, or are they going to come in fired up and ready to go? So yeah, it's an interesting challenge for those of us who get to work with that level. So, okay, why don't we start off with just like framing the kind of conversation. So from your perspective, kind of what's the starting point of looking at this sort of at this motivation issue in terms of where the kids are coming from and where the coaches kind of have to get their minds right? And either one of you can take this as a starting point. Doesn't really matter.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think the first thing with this is building a foundation, so a culture. And that's obviously a word that's thrown around a lot these days, but there has to be some shared values, because quite oftentimes there's going to be a honeymoon period when teams first get together. There's that excitement of starting something new. Everyone's kind of bringing their best. But then human nature says that might not last, and that starts to disintegrate a little bit. And then what is going to hold that team together? And those are the shared values. So let's say we have two shared values, passion and purpose. All of a sudden, we see that motivation maybe waning. And then the first thing we have is we have a frame of reference, which are those shared values. And then we can evaluate, okay, where are we? What are we doing? How do are our behaviors aligned with our values? So I think it doesn't start just when that motivation concern, rears its ugly head. It starts right when we start putting the team together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that completely.
Jess,
For me, it's hard. Sorry, what was that? I don't know if my internet's...
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, no, I agree with everything Todd said. And yeah, for me, I just try and think of like what gets kids excited and what is their purpose? Like Todd said, you have to have a purpose. I think so much for kids, younger kids, it's about being on a team and being with teammates. So I think the more we can talk about, being there for each other and that our purpose is our teammates and how we're affecting them, how we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, I think is a huge starting point to kind of that idea.
So basically, the first question I have that comes to mind is, where is the purpose coming from? Is it something that the coach is driving, or is it something that the coach kind of picks up from the kids and then builds upon from there?
I would say that like the coach is kind of the leader of that. Like what we talk about and focus on kind of becomes what the team talks about and focuses on for the most part. So I think if we talk about those things and just how are we affecting our teammates today? What are we doing to make our teammates better today? And we kind of point out those things and show examples of when kids are doing it right, like when they're making their teammates better, how are they encouraging their teammates, how are they, making the environment in the gym better. If we talk about that and point it out, I think it motivates kids to want to do those things.
Yeah, John, I have no problem being the expert. That is, if I'm dealing with a 14-year-old girl who's been on 2 teams in her life, and I've been coaching teams for 35 years, for me to set up hey, these are going to be our shared values, and, we're not going to spend a lot of time thinking, hey, what is, is this okay with you? We're going to vote on values. For young teams, I think as groups get older and you're dealing with maybe college or pro, like you were saying, I think there's, valuing those experiences those players have had, I think is important. But I think when you start with a young team, especially a young team of kids that haven't been on a lot of teams, I don't think being autocratic is a bad thing.
All right, fair enough. In terms of establishing those values, what does it look like on the spectrum from the young kids, the 12s, the 14s, and then progressing them up to the kids who are, high school varsity type players? Do you approach them in different ways?
Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I don't think it's drastically different. Obviously, as kids get older, they have been on more teams. They've been a part of especially if they've come through our program, they kind of have an idea of what our expectations are and what we think a team should look like. But I think it's not that different. Something that we've been doing and we've done even more of it during this time out of the gym, is we've been reading books with our teams and just talking about, concepts that we want to kind of have as a part of our culture from what we've read. One book that I've really loved reading with teams is Legacy. Obviously, for the really young ones, that's probably not going to be a great one, but I'm reading it with my 14s team right now, and they're really getting a lot out of it. And just the idea of emulating cultures that have been really successful, and what values are we learning that we're going to have as the focal points of our team.
Yeah, for me, I've been had the same really 3 values that I've used for 12 and unders through my high school varsity teams, and how we approach it and how we work with those values changes a little bit, but the 3 that we've used have been effort, and that is we just expect great effort. The second one is what we call teamness, and it's really not work, because helping our teammates become better shouldn't be work, so we call it teamness. And then the third one is attitude. So we call it ETA, effort, teamness, attitude. And we kind of frame everything we do around those 3 things. And if we say that, hey, I've been coaching a long time, I want to have a good time. And I define fun, saying that, hey, everybody's trying as hard as they can. Everybody cares about each other. And everybody frames things in a positive way. And if everybody are doing those 3 things, I think we can have a blast in the gym. We don't need to create dances or something to have fun. We define fun in a pretty specific way, that we're going to come in and do these things every day, and it's going to be fun.
Todd, are you saying that your kids don't have dances?
The kids have plenty of dances. Todd doesn't have dances.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've never seen you dance, so
trust me, it's a good thing.
Okay. All right, Jess, you talked about doing the books. To both of you, what's the ongoing work? So obviously reading is a part of that, but on a weekly basis or daily basis or whatever, that keeps building on that process of developing the culture and the motivation and everything that goes into it.
And for us, we check in with our kids at the end of every practice. And I think yeah, it's just as far as motivation in general, I think progress is a huge motivator too, like really pointing out and applauding progress. So we'll check in and say, what did we do well today? Like, who was a great teammate today and why, and just kind of have those things that we refer back to and like, how did we do it this today? What can we do a little bit better? And then something I started doing with my 14s team this year is I kind of created a little sheet, and each of them had to write down or actually circle for the team part. But first, for each skill, they wrote down a technical goal that was their focus for that day. So with passing, it's, make an early angle or, whatever the one technical focus is. And then there was a team, I called it just like team focused behaviors. So whether it's, cheering on teammates, giving people high fives, or making their best effort for every single ball, hustling around the gym, like, whatever that team first behavior is, they had to circle one that was going to be their focus of that day. Like they're going to do a really good job at that one thing. And then at the end of practice, evaluate that. Like, how was I? Did I go for every ball like I said I was? Did I encourage my teammates and give everybody high fives,
That's great stuff. I love that. Kind of checking in. For me, my framework is probably a little different now than it was when I was a young coach. When I was a young coach, I used to think that I needed to do something to motivate, that was coming from me. Now I believe that I have to make sure that I'm not killing motivation. And I think being relentless in identifying the ways that I kill motivation as a coach and change those behaviors is critical. And I'll give you a quick example. Let's say beginning of practice. So I'll say it could be a high school practice or a club practice. So kids come in the gym and let's say it's a club practice. So you're getting your court from another team. That team moves off, your team goes on. That first 10 minutes, what is happening? And so I'll watch, I've seen hundreds of club practices. I've run a bunch of club practices. And that first 10 minutes, let's say that the team first starts with a coach talking. And the coach reviews what happened in the last tournament. And the coach has on the practice plan 5 minutes for that. But people have some questions. And all of a sudden, that 5-minute meeting goes to 11 minutes. Now we're 11 minutes in. Now you get into a warm-up, and you have this scripted warm-up. And so while the team is going through this warm-up, the coaches really aren't paying attention. The coaches are, maybe if there's two coaches, they're talking to each other, or maybe there's one coach and the coach is scrolling through the cell phone, and the team is kind of on their own. And then you get into this, they start hitting the ball into the ground, and which is one of my kind of pet peeves, this young kids hitting the ball into the ground. Why we think that is a good behavior and that should begin every practice, I'll never know. This is the worst thing we want, is kids hitting the ball into the ground. We want them to hit it over a net, and that's an issue for me. So maybe we can be 15 to 20 minutes into a practice, and that's all that's happened. And if I have a team that's not motivated, it's my fault. It's not, I have to be very, very deliberate in everything I'm doing. And then it might be, hey, what's going on with your best player? Are you challenging your best player all the time? So I think a bunch of our practice activities that we do and a bunch of our practice habits need to be changed to make sure that we're not killing player motivation. And I have a whole list of those things.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And, one thing that I try to do at every practice is start with something fun, like get the kids going with a competition of some kind, whether it's volley tennis or a drill where they're, going from 1 to 2 to 3 contacts, something where they're competing while getting warm and touching a volleyball in the way that we want them to play volleyballs when we're actually playing the game. So yeah, I think that fun and excitement to start practice usually gets things off on the right note.
I love that too. That's on my list too, Jess.
Nice.
The thing I would put in there, and I've actually written about this on the blog, is there's some psychology to how you plan a practice, and especially how you plan the beginning and the ending, because those tend to be the things that people remember. They don't really remember the stuff in the middle. So if you're setting up your practices so they have fun at the end and they remember having fun at the end, and you do things in the beginning that you know they're going to be excited for, chances are they're going to want to come back and they're going to be excited to come back and walk into the gym and get going. If you put the boring stuff at the beginning, or you kind of end on a dull note all the time, it's going to be tougher to have them be excited to come back and be engaged the next time. So yeah, definitely interesting there. And Todd, totally agree with you 1,000% on the spiking the ball on the floor or throwing the ball on the floor. I've even yelled at college-age players about that. My friend Ruben, who coaches professionally in Europe, he doesn't let his players do that. He makes them hit the ball to each other at a minimum if they're not going over the net. So I'm with you, brother.
Hey, my players will hit the ball into the floor for 15 or 20 minutes if I don't say anything.
Oh, yeah.
They'll just come in and they'll hit them. I mean, I don't know what it is that we've created. We've created these monsters. But that takes me, I like your point, John, about the end of practice, because Jess made a great point about having an evaluation and really having her thumb on the pulse of what's happening with her team at the end of practice and getting some feedback. And one of the traditions that we have at the end of our practices is our coaches give out stars. And so those stars, I have these little sticker stars, and you can buy them for, $3, and there's 100 of them. And so each coach, if I have, we're working with club team of young kids and we had high school kids come in to coach, they would give the stars. I would always give a star, and you give it for a behavior that is perfectly aligned with those values. So it might not be this person had the greatest spike today, because everybody remembers that. I might say, hey, what about this coverage play that this player made? Because that was an effort play. And that was something that we haven't been doing well. We haven't been covering. And all of a sudden she went in and covered 2 balls today, so she gets a star. And so we're always ending practice by pointing out the things that are aligned with our values. And the kids walk out of the gym with stars going, hey, I got a star today. And why did I get it? I got it for this behavior that was aligned with the values. I didn't get it because I hit the hardest.
Yeah, I'll go off that too. Something a lot of our coaches like to do are like shout outs from the other players. So like go around the circle and each player says like, my shout out today is for this teammate because they did this or they did a great job of that. And I also think that's a cool thing as well, because they're hearing it from their teammates and their peers, and they know that their friend appreciated something they did that day.
Yeah, I did something similar when I was coaching in England, in that it wasn't stars per se, but it was me picking the player that was going to do the team cheer at the end. And I would name somebody, and my focus was to make sure that everybody was getting appreciated for whatever contribution they were able to make. And it wasn't even necessarily in that practice. It might have been in the last week. It might have been in the match before. Todd, kind of to your point, Todd, like, well, okay, everybody's cheering the big spiker or the server who got 10 aces or whatever. But, making sure that the players who maybe aren't getting the recognition are getting at a minimum the acknowledgement from me that, I see that they're doing a good job and that they're doing the things that we want them to do. And it's also funny because they're usually surprised by it. So then they stumble and fumble and forget how to do the team cheer, which of course gets everybody laughing. I had a question in terms of difference between working with a club team and working with the high school team, because obviously you're talking different schedules for one part. You're not a high school team, you're seeing them practically every day. But you've got competition between there a bit. Whereas in the club schedule, it's a little bit more intermittent. Competitions tend to be spaced out a bit more. So is there a difference for either of you in how you handle the ongoing work?
Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, as far as player motivation, it's not all that different. I think that, at least in my experience, the high school teams, there's a lot more distraction present because their friends at school are then, they had their whole full school day, they walk into the gym and now they're seeing their friends, but they have to get to work. So I think, sometimes there will be, chatter about their day at school or what happened with this one or, whatever it might be. So I think really as far as like being focused and hardworking, that's a challenge that I've found. And just, kind of some reminders like, why are we here? What's our goal? Just talking about being there for their teammates and that, and sometimes I've actually tried doing things like giving them longer water breaks so that they can have those chats, at that time when we're not trying to accomplish something or, in a drill. But yeah, that's really the only difference for me is kind of the social aspect of the high school team and those distractions. Whereas I don't find that nearly as much with our club teams.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think in high school, at least with the varsity team, there's a honeymoon period. And so the kids make the team, you put your team together, you kind of set up the values, practices, or school hasn't started yet quite often. So the kids are coming in, they're focused on volleyball, they're fresh. And so that start is always, some of the best practices of the year or right in the beginning when we start before school starts. All of a sudden school starts, academic demands come up, social stuff happens, and then we can deal with some of those motivation issues when we get into the, dog days. They get, midterms, big projects, all those things. We have 2 late matches that, 5 setters that during the week, and the kids are just beat. They're not getting sleep. I'm at a school that it's challenging academically. So, I have to be aware of that. Club is a little bit different, but sometimes the club kids, they're coming in and practicing from 7 to 9 at night, and they have a bunch of distractions. If you have a lower level team and you have a great team practicing next to you, those kids' eyes, they're wandering off there all the time, and it's hard to get them kind of focused back when you have a dynamic hitter on the next court that they've never seen. Their eyes are easily wander.
Yeah, for sure. Or if you're working with a 12 and under team and there's an 18 and under team on the next court, good luck. That's where you learn the tricks of pedagogy, right? All right, where do I make sure my back is to a wall and not to the other court? All that sort of stuff.
Well, hey, at one of our facilities, they have TVs on each court. So our coaches constantly have to be mindful of if they're talking to the group and the TV is behind them, that's no good.
Yeah, for sure. The other element.
Let me throw out one other item on that, and that has to do with the club situation. I think the one teams or the top teams in the age group reminds me a little bit of the varsity team, where those kids, they meet their goal of getting placed on the team that they want. And so our JV coach is always dealing with, 2, 3, 4 kids who are the best players on their team who didn't make the varsity. So we have a motivation issue right now. They come in after trying out for varsity, playing a high level of volleyball, and then all of a sudden they have to play with the JV team, and they're all of a sudden the best players. The level is lower, and so we have a motivation issue that can be a problem starting off. I think sometimes when you have a twos team and a couple of those players, maybe they've been on the ones team for when they were 12s and 13s, and then they're 14, some new kids join the club, and all of a sudden they're on the 14 twos, and they walk into that first practice, and they're the best player on that twos team, and the coach is all excited to have them on the team. that player doesn't share that excitement. So I think that those are some motivation issues that I think are built into the frameworks of both high school and club.
Yeah, well, the follow-up question for that would be from me is, what can that twos coach or that JV coach or the senior coach in coordination with those other coaches do to work with those players to get them in the right frame of mind to continue to learn, to continue to get better, to continue to aspire to be on, the top team for the next season or whatever that their eventual long-term goal is?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's a lot of conversations about leadership and just the opportunity to be a leader on this team and set the example and set the standard for the group that they're now with. And, if they were on varsity, as an example, like they might be the 12th, 13th person who really doesn't see any playing time, but on the JV team, they have this opportunity to lead the team, to be the one on the court, that everyone kind of looks to, and what a big responsibility that is. And, the responsibility of teaching the rest of that team what it means to be a high level player and set that example every day. I mean, that's the kind of conversation I would have with those kids. And I know our JV coaches have done that quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm right in there with Jess. And as the varsity coach, I think I'm important there because if they didn't make the team they wanted, then I want to make sure that I still value their contribution to the program and they know how important that is. And I let them know that, hey, I'm going to make sure as we go through the season that I throw them some bones, meaning that, hey, I'm going to get you into some of our Saturday practices with varsity. I'm going to allow you to stay and practice with varsity when the JV finishes early. But you're going to have that responsibility that Jess talks about. We're going to try to give you the best of both worlds. That's one thing. I think the other thing is what we've started doing is we have varsity tryouts and then we have a break before JV starts. So that we don't have JV starting and then that person joining JV. We give them a couple of days and then we say, hey, you're going to be a leader right when you walk in the gym that first day, and we're going to be working with you because you're going to have a huge impact on this team. So take a day or two to, not making that team is tough and we're going to let it go. But, hey, you're going to come back on Wednesday and we're going to expect you to be a leader from the time you walk in the gym because your talent level is such that the other players are going to look up to you. And that's a great role for you to learn and grow. And especially for our younger players, they're not going to learn that on varsity in, like Jess said, the 12th or 13th position.
Okay. Just a quick reminder to anybody in the audience, feel free to shoot in any questions you want anytime. Best to use the question and answer function because that'll pop up directly. I wanted to kind of move this into the competition arena because the high school structure and the club structure, usually there are high school tournaments, but they're not generally as big and lengthy as the juniors tournaments. So there's some different challenges. So can you talk about managing the kids through those competitions?
Go ahead, Jess.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, we talk a lot about growth mindset and being process oriented and not being focused on outcomes. So honestly, what I try and talk about in either setting is just we're here to learn and get better. We're not just here for this match or this tournament or to get, this medal or, whatever it is. It's how can we learn and improve as a team in this setting and against, the competition we get to play today. So I think if it's always focused on that kind of improvement and what are we doing well, what are we implementing that we've been working on, and just sort of let's have fun, like let's enjoy this competition as a team. I don't think it's as hard to get kids motivated because, like, let's say you're at a club tournament and you lose your first 2 matches and then you have to play a third match and you know you can't win the tournament or reach whatever goal it is. If the focus isn't that outcome, if it's more about the improvement in the process and what are we doing well that we care about, I think that keeps kids kind of playing the way we want them to.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the same process orientation that Jess was talking about. I think when we look at specific motivational issues, obviously playing time becomes a big one. And John, you mentioned it before when you talked about valuing everyone's contribution. And at the high school level, I'm pretty straightforward with kids. And we'll be honest with kids. If they're in the 12th and 13th player on the team, they might not get on the court against our rival when we're battling for first place in the league. We expect, our standard is that player embraces that role, not just accepts it, but embraces it. So that motivation and working with that player, like you said, valuing their contribution to the team is something that I spend a lot of time and energy with, whether they be individual meetings, whether they be making sure that our coaches and captains are all connecting with that player and that player feels valued. Because sometimes it's easy for players to get lost in the shuffle if you're in the midst of competition and that person isn't playing. You're showing your team's video and they're not in it. What are their eyes doing when you're watching video and they're on the bench? So all those things I think are all opportunities for motivation issues.
Yeah, actually, in your position at Bishops, I'm curious. You obviously have kids who are high achievers, at a minimum from the academic standard. So whether they be perfectionists or near perfectionists or whatever, there's obviously a certain edge to them in terms of I expect to do well all the time. And volleyball is not an arena where you're going to do well all the time because inherently errors are a big part of the game. So how do you deal with that dichotomy?
I love that question because we talk about that all the time, and that's why I think volleyball is such a great sport for our perfectionist kids, because you're fighting gravity and you're going to lose, and it's good for our kids to lose. And I'll talk to the parents at the parent meeting and say, hey, it's good for us when we lose. And the parents don't necessarily like to hear that, but when we lose, we all, players and coaches, we work harder to figure out, hey, what went wrong, and we have to make changes and we have to improve. When you win that 15-13 nail biter, you walk off the court saying, oh, Sally was so clutch, or you remember every great play. But when you lose 15-13 in the fifth, you remember every error. Oh, Sally, she let us down, and so, but the difference was really 2 points. And so keeping a, balanced perspective when we look at our behaviors, and hey, the perfectionists, we want to make errors and we try to celebrate good errors all the time. So if a kid jumps up, gets a perfect set and hits a ball a foot out, makes the right decision because the ball was, line was open and they turned the ball down the line and they miss it by a foot, hey, that's a great error. We try to celebrate that, where naturally their perfectionist mindset would be, oh, I'm horrible, I just missed. And so trying to change that framework is important for us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we talk all the time about how we have to fail to learn, that if we did everything the same way or the right way, like we wouldn't learn much. So we just say that all the time, like, hey, failure is a part of learning and we need it, and you're going to make errors, you're going to make mistakes. And yeah, I think what Tod said is huge, is celebrating the good errors, the aggressive errors. it's the errors where they're unfocused or, you know, not doing what we're asking them to do that, you know, obviously those aren't helping us much. But when they're making an error, either because they're trying something new or different, which we want them to do all the time, or because they were super aggressive, like we try and applaud that as much as possible.
The other part, John, I'll say is, you know, that perfectionist mindset, you know, those kids, a lot of them, they do want to be challenged and they like pushing themselves. They don't like failing, but they like to be challenged. So can we reframe this failure? And can we say, hey, this failure is an opportunity for you to respond in a positive manner. And this is your biggest challenge right now, is not to hang your head and, oh, my bad, I can't believe I made that error. Your challenge is, can you respond in a next play mentality? And that becomes our goal rather than the goal of being perfect. It's the goal of, hey, we're going to respond in a better way than we did before. And can we teach them to deal with adversity, because there's we have a bunch of opportunities in volleyball to teach that.
Yeah, I usually warn my teams at the beginning of the season that I'm going to put them through frustrating practices. I'm not going to tell them when it's going to happen, but I'm intentionally going to, from time to time, plan a practice that I expect them to mentally struggle with, to get frustrated with, because they need to learn how to handle that, because it happens in matches all the time. Happens in tournaments all the time. Happens in life all the time. And I don't know how much they actually like that, but for the most part, I think they understand the rationale for it. Todd, you opened up a certain can of worms called parents there a minute ago. So how do we make the parents part of this motivation conversation, at a minimum, to keep them from counteracting the things that we're trying to do positively?
Well, I think they have to be part of it. You know, I think that, you know, I can't expect as a high school coach for a parent to pay money for the kids to play club, to travel around the nation, to make all kinds of sacrifices for this kid to play volleyball for 9 months out of the year, and then come into my high school season and say, oh, leave me alone. I'm the coach. I know what's best. You know, hey, these parents, you know, when I started coaching, you know, 40 years ago or whenever, the parents weren't savvy at all. They were just happy their kids were doing something. But now the parents, they're sitting around club tournaments all day. You know, Jess's parent group at Prime, they are a savvy group of volleyball fans. They know what's going on because they spent so much time in the gym watching their kids play. So it's important for me to communicate with them and to let them know that they're important, but these are the ways that you can help us, and these are the ways that you can hurt us. And trying to be pretty clear with, you know, acceptable behaviors and what will really help us.
Any additional thoughts there, Jess?
I agree with exactly what Todd said, honestly. Like, that's what I think, and just making sure that the parents understand what our values are, what we're about, what we're looking for from their kids, and just that their role is to support their kids. And, you know, I think a tough parent topic is parents who try and kind of coach their kids or talk to their kids too much about what's going on the court, as opposed to, you know, I'm sure we've all heard you know, what a parent should say is just that I love watching you play, and leave it at that. But a lot of parents don't do that, obviously, but just if they are going to talk to their kids about what's going on the court, hopefully if they know our values and what we're looking for and what's important to us as a program, then they can hopefully be echoing those things to their kids instead of saying things like to the contrary.
The other part of that, John, comes with the idea of parents second guessing the coach. And I tell parents all the time, like, hey, if you've been watching a lot of volleyball, you're going to second guess a lot of decisions I make. It's human nature. I'm going to second guess the decisions I make. So it's natural for you to do it, especially if it might not be in your daughter's best interest. So that's okay. The problem is you can't vocalize that in front of other people. You can't vocalize that in front of your daughter, and you can't vocalize that in front of other parents, because then you are eating into the fabric of our culture. You are sowing the seeds of discontent. And then your daughter comes into practice and her effort level goes down. And what happens in practice when her effort levels goes down? Then she doesn't play as much. And then we get into this vicious cycle where coach doesn't like me. Well, no, the parent created a situation where the parent was saying, hey, your coach doesn't know what he's doing. And so the player comes into practice and says, oh, my coach doesn't know what he's doing. My parent doesn't, coach knows what he's doing. I'm not going to try. And now we have a problem. So I try to make it pretty clear to parents that, hey, you can second guess me. You just can't do it in front of your daughter.
Yeah, I think too many coaches take the view that they want nothing to do with parents. Like the parents should be outside, away from the team. I don't want to interact with them. There's helicopter parent stereotype and all that stuff. But I think personally, I think that's actually a mistake. I think there's a lot of value that you can gain as a coach from interacting with the parents, because they know more about their kids than you do. They've been with them a lot longer, and they see them all the time. You don't. They're aware of things that are happening in their lives that you aren't aware of. So sometimes you could pick up on things that, all right, maybe today we might have an issue with Sally because of something that happened in the family, and you can accommodate that. Where on a different day, if you're not aware of that, maybe you don't react very well. You tend to react negatively, or you weigh that in a way that doesn't make sense in some decisions that you make. So I think for coaches to just kind of throw away that potential interaction is a waste of a potentially really valuable resource.
Yeah, I agree, John. I used to probably, when I was a younger coach, I used to think that if I did a great job, the parents would just come along, and I didn't need to do a lot of work with parents. And number one, I don't think I was doing such a great job, so that was one issue. And then number two, I was making some big assumptions there. So I think part of my job as a coach now is, running the program. The parents are part of it, and making sure the parents are on board and taking the time to value their contribution is important.
All right, let's talk about coach demeanor, because we obviously can see examples of coaches who are extremely high energy, and we can see examples of coaches who are much more sedate. I won't call them low energy because that's not really fair. I think we can probably all agree that coaches need to coach to their own personality, to be themselves as a coach. But you, Todd, you brought up at the beginning the idea that a coach can actually get in their own way in terms of demotivating players in some respects. And I've also heard other coaches express it in terms of their personality doesn't leave room for players to actually develop their own group or individual sense of personality and motivation. So can you guys talk to that? Jess, why don't you start?
Sure. As far as demeanor, I'll talk about in competition. I think one thing that's really important as coaches is to not visibly show our frustration or disappointment, because if we're telling the kids that we want them to be process-based, but then we're getting visibly frustrated or upset by certain outcomes, we're not basically reinforcing what our philosophy is. So I try really hard, obviously we're going to have moments of frustration or disappointment, but I really try not to let those show to my athletes, where they can look over on the sideline and go like, oh man, my coach is so bummed I hit that out or whatever. And then for me, and especially with our younger groups, but honestly, even with an 18s team, if our kids are doing something that's exceptional as far as what we've been working on, or accomplishing something that's, they've been thinking about for a long time, I always want to celebrate those things, so I'll get fired up. if we've been working on out of system setting and our libero goes and, makes a great play on a difficult ball, like I'm going to get fired up for that kid and like show them how excited I am that they're successful at something they've been working on. So I'm personally not like a overly emotional coach where I'm jumping around or getting, too fired up during the match. But if a kid does something that we've been working on and is successful at that thing, I'll definitely like get up and give them a fist pump or get fired up. But I think it's really important not to show the frustration in the bad outcomes.
Yeah, I'm probably right in line with Jess there. And like you said, I think you have to be yourself. And I think we've all seen the Jekyll and Hyders, the coaches that are the nicest, kindest people until you get 10-10 in the fifth, and then they become possessed the competition there. So if that's the way they are, and hey, who's the Russian guy, John, the bear or whatever? That guy was crazy.
Yeah.
I saw him at a coaching clinic once.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of different ways to do it, and I want to honor the coach's personality. But I think Jess is right that, hey, when the kids see that you're excited because of something they learned and seeing that improvement, that's exciting. That's fun, and celebrating that is great.
Yeah, there's two things that I'd like to add to this. First, to your point, Jess, about like contradictory body language. One of the things that kills me is when I see a coach who's in practice is process, and be aggressive and, go after the block and all this. And then players start making a couple of mistakes in the matches and they tell them to, go for the middle, tip the ball, don't swing so hard. You're just going, you just things that you've been working on for the last month. In one like timeout, you just destroyed everything. So you completely ruin all of any credibility that you might have developed to your philosophy. And the other thing, also related to body language and kind of energy, is this example I saw when I was coaching in Sweden. I was watching the club's second team, which is basically like a U19 sort of age group. They played in the second division. They were playing against a team that was definitely better than them by, a step or two. It was a whole match, but the outcome was probably inevitable. But they came out really on fire. They were really stoked. They played really well. They had the other team on the back foot for like the first half of the first set. The coach was really animated, jumping up and down, cheering. And then inevitably, as things got later, the tide started swinging the other direction. And I watched the coach go from being really animated on the sideline to going and sitting down. And I was like, oh my God. I don't think you even realize this, but you basically just told your team you quit on them. Like, you don't think they can do it. You can't stop what you're doing. If you're going to be the energetic coach, be the energetic coach. If you're going to be the sit on the bench coach, be the sit on the bench coach. But be consistent, because the kids pick up on these things. Even in some really funny ways.
That's a good point. John, is the kids are experts. They're experts because they have a bunch of different teachers, and they're experts at evaluating teachers. And so we have to be good, and we have to continue to get better, because they're savvy consumers, because they're sitting, a lot of them, if they have 4 or 5 classes a day, they have a bunch of different teachers in front of them every day, and they're making evaluations of those teachers all the time. And they know what a good teacher's like. They can sniff passion. They can sniff commitment. They can sniff expertise. And so that makes it challenging for us to always try to be getting better.
What were you going to say, Jess?
Oh no, I was just seconding what you said. That is probably something that drives me bananas more than anything, is a coach who just visibly gives up on their team, sits down, starts kind of looking around like they're just over it. Like, I just think that's one of the most awful things you can do to your team.
One of the most dramatic examples I ever heard of, I didn't witness this personally, so there might be a bit of mythology involved. This is back when I was coaching at Brown. The prior, well, actually, he was still the Princeton coach at that time. He retired a few years later. But there was a story about a match that Princeton had played a few years before where they were just playing terrible, at least by his reckoning. He turned his chair around and sat facing away from the court. I didn't know him all that well, so and I don't know if the story is 100% true, but it would certainly be pretty dramatic if that's the case.
Sounds like some old school stuff there.
You probably ran into him. I mean, well, I don't know. I don't know if he came to San Diego. I heard reports that he basically only ever went to Orange County and played golf and hung out with Charlie and recruited Orange County kids.
That's how we got all his players from Charlie.
This is all making sense.
All right. We have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is, well, it's actually two from Ruth Nelson. The first one she wants to know is, in terms of spending time with parents, are you spending more time with high school parents or with club team parents?
I'd say it's tough. Probably more club team parents because we're traveling together. You know, we find ourselves at airports together. We find ourselves in long breaks during tournaments. Whereas high school, you know, obviously we're not seeing the parents at practices and they come to matches and, you know, we might say hello before or after, but there's not as much downtime together, I would say. So I think as on the whole, I would say I get to know my club parents a lot better. But at high school, I mean, our high school programs can't run without parent volunteers. So if there's not a parent running the snack bar, I mean, I have a mom at our high school who is just phenomenal and does all kinds of amazing things for our program that I could never do. So I talk with those parents who, you know, do the volunteering and stuff quite a bit and get to know them just because they're doing so much to help our program. But I mean, there's probably some parents at the high school program that I've not gotten the opportunity to talk with more than a few times.
Yeah, I probably echo what Jess was saying. I think the one difference might be that if I have a talented freshman, I'm going to be around her parents for maybe 4 years. So that's a little different as far as, you know, getting to know those parents than it might be if I have you know, if I'm coaching a player for one club season. But I think that club time that you have, like Jess said, it's different than high school.
Are either of you engaging much with the parents right now during, you know, all the distancing and the lockdown and all that?
Just a little bit. You know, I've tried to send updates to our parents. How we communicate as a club is I send, you know, info to our team parents who then distribute it to each of their teams. So I definitely have been talking with our team parents a little bit more, but yeah, parents have kind of been checking in, just asking like, hey, what's the latest, what's going on? And then, you know, we've been trying to do a lot to keep our kids involved and to, you know, have them on Zoom and getting them watching video or reading books like I talked about. So we have had parents nice enough to reach out and kind of thank us for keeping their kids invested and keeping them engaged, even though we can't be in the gym. But yeah, right now, probably not as much as when we get to see them all the time.
And I'm not really doing anything right now. For my high school team, I try to keep the communication really direct to players for the most part. So I don't want to communicate with players through parents. So on high school, no. And then my work at Coast Volleyball Club is really primarily with coaches. So I know that there are administrators at Coast that are, like Jess is saying, that are in communication with parents, but I'm not one of them.
All right, we've got a question from a high school coach who asked, I like to ask a lot of questions about how things felt, what they saw, obviously of the players. I always feel like the responses they give me are what they think I want to hear rather than what they actually think. How can I get them to answer more honestly? Always a challenge. Who wants it first?
Go ahead, Jess.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think just talking about that's the culture you want, that you want their individual ideas. I think one thing that I see a lot is when you ask a question of a group and one person talks first, then everyone else just wants to echo that person instead of coming up with their own ideas or sharing something different maybe. But yeah, maybe just asking follow-up questions and just kind of trying to probe a little bit more or ask a question in a way that gets them thinking about something different as opposed to just like the expected answer. But yeah, just talking a lot about how we want a culture of honesty and truthfulness and authenticity and just how important that is to the team and that everyone bring their own thoughts and ideas, and that's what makes a team great. You know, if everybody were the same, then that wouldn't be much of a team. It would get pretty boring and it wouldn't, you know, we'd have one set of strengths and weaknesses instead of 12 sets of strengths and weaknesses that kind of balance each other.
I'll throw a couple different ideas out there. The first is some players will write on paper and they won't talk. So giving kids opportunities to respond on paper might be one avenue that gets a different response. I think the second part, and Jess mentioned it, is the way you ask questions. And so if I ask a question such as, how did you like practice today? Oh, practice was great. But if I ask, give me 3 specific things that we can do to make practices better. So those are framed, really asking the same thing, but they're framed in a different way because I'm really trying to probe to get that player to give me some negatives and to say, okay, well, maybe I just want one thing, but I'm going to ask for 3 so they'll at least give me 1. Because if I ask for 3, it's pretty tough for them to say, I can't think of anything. But if I just ask for 1, they might say, no, I can't think of anything. So just being deliberate in the way that I frame questions, I think, is important. And then giving a bunch of different opportunities. One-on-one with 2 kids, 2 best friends. Maybe you can get kids to loosen up if you do it in pairs with the kid and her best friend on the team. Maybe you want them individually. Maybe, you know, I think like Jess said, when you have it in front of the whole team, I think it's tough to get honest, you know, everybody to step forward and be comfortable being honest.
Yeah, the other thing I would throw out there is if you're doing things in a group setting, we all know that there's always the dominant personalities in a group, almost always. So they're very likely to be the first ones to speak up anytime you bring something up. So if you set an expectation that you're going to pick people to answer rather than just let whoever throws the words out first be the response for the group, then you force them all to now be thinking because they don't know if they're going to be the ones to get the question. Kind of like the trick of the teacher giving out case studies and making sure everybody does the homework by randomly picking who's going to have to do the presentation today. So that's one possibility. A question I was going to ask both of you is how often do you do one-on-one type of meetings with your kids, club versus high school and such?
Well, for me, I like to do them like throughout the season, like a few check-ins individually. At the start of the season, just talking about, you know, individual sort of goals, like what they're wanting to work on, talk about their role on the team, like Tod mentioned earlier. And then, yeah, a mid-season check-in I think is always important. Like Tod talked about as well, the sort of honeymoon phase is over and that kid who, you talk to about being, the last player on varsity, and you're probably not going to get a lot of playing time. And at the time they just say, oh my gosh, yes, I'm so excited to be on varsity. I don't care at all about playing time. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to be a part of the team. And then halfway through the season, they're complaining and frustrated because they're not playing, or, not giving great effort at practice because they don't see the point. I think checking in, with everybody from that player to your best player, and like, how can we keep helping you get better? What do you think, we need to do better as a team? Just sort of having those conversations to get a good pulse of what's going on, I think is important.
Yeah, for me, I like to use the time that we have, that a lot of time is dead time. So tournament time, if I'm not scouting and players are hanging around, that's a nice time for me to just check in and talk to a player where it's nothing formal. I don't have to set up anything ahead of time. So finding little bits of time, kid comes in early to practice or something, and I'm able to say, hey, you have a second? I just want to check in with you. Maybe I keep a kid late for 2 minutes and just check in. But sometimes if we travel, I'll set them up formally and say, hey, we're on, we're, in high school and we're traveling, we went to Hawaii last year. We were fortunate enough to take a little trip there. And so we had a bunch of downtime on our trip. So we had individual meetings, in Hawaii before and after a meal. I would always take a player, and we would have a individual meeting right on one side of breakfast and then another one on the other. And we try to do that with our meals. On the other hand, with captains, I'm talking to them all the time. And I'm always trying to get saying, hey, how we doing? Who's anybody kind of slipping off the bus? Anything I'm not seeing? So the captains, I have a kind of an ongoing conversation with on every other day, but individual players less so.
Okay. Kyle sent in a question. He wants to know about post-match and or end of tournament day conversations. So how much time do you spend recapping a match, or in the case of a tournament, at the end of a tournament day, your players that day versus obviously carrying it over maybe to the next day? Does it say coaches having long conversations? Personally, don't like having long conversations because I think the players are tired and I haven't fully synthesized what has happened. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll jump into this because I can remember when my philosophy changed, and it was about probably 20 years ago, and we were playing our rival away, and we were so bad. And at the end of the match, I just tore into the team, and it was the worst thing I could have done because it took me probably 4 weeks to recover from that, just kind of trying to patch up all the mayhem that I created by the things I said after the match. So for the last 20 years, we've had the same tradition that Jess mentioned before, and that we go around the circle. Everybody has to mention something about another player, and it has to be within our value structure. So you have to mention something about effort, something about being a great teammate, or something about attitude from one of their teammates. And then coaches do it at the end, and we hope that every player gets at least recognized for one thing, and then we end it. We don't talk about the match at all. All that's done afterward. The 24-hour rule applies to me too.
Yeah, I would agree. I try and keep it pretty short. The thing is, if it's been a success, at least for a club tournament, I'd say if it's been a successful day, I'll probably talk for a little longer about all the things I'm proud of. And again, like I already mentioned, have them go around first. I think that is important to have them contribute first so that they're not just parroting everything that I say. So yeah, we'll spend a little longer just sort of congratulating the things that went well. But if the day didn't go well or we ended with a bad match, I very rarely discuss the match at that time. I'll, quickly point out maybe a couple good things and then say, we'll talk more about this, at practice if we need to, or if it's something that's just like, what, that's over, we don't need to address it. Maybe that's the case too.
Okay, very good. A question came in terms of captains. How do you pick them? Or do you pick them, or do you let the team pick?
Well, I can tell you about our high school program, and we vote on captains at the end of our season for the following season. So my high school team finished at the end of November. So we voted for this next year's captains, and we announced it at the banquet that we had in January. And that's the first thing that we do to really get that next season started is we identify the captains. The graduating seniors vote because we think their vote is important. That's part of their legacy in the program is choosing the leaders for the next year. And we think that they see everybody at their best and at their worst through the whole season. So their votes matter. So I think especially at a place like Bishop's where kids are, they're bright kids. They're very adept at pleasing adults. They communicate with me very, very well. They're very articulate. And I've had players who I think would make a great captain, and I find out because they're such great communicators with me, but they might not be great communicators with their teammates. So I let the players choose, and the only time I'll step in is if there's some kind of tie. I'll break the tie. But other than that, I go with what they say.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Actually, Todd's friend Dan mentioned that to me the other day, that's how Tod does his captains and that the outgoing kids vote as well. I think that's an awesome idea. I've done literally just about everything depending on the team. Like I've had teams vote. This last year with my high school program, we had 6 seniors, and they all badly wanted to be team captains to the point where I started hearing a little bit about how they were already chatting with some of the younger players about voting for them for captain. And so I very quickly decided that we weren't going to have team captains. And we just, had leadership groups, and our seniors were our leaders as a group. And they kind of switched off who went up and did the handshake and all that stuff. But we sort of just had them as our senior leaders as opposed to captains because, it wasn't appropriate for that group, I think, to have captains. And I actually have had one other team where I just felt like we had so many natural leaders where instead of having just straight team captains, like each person had a different responsibility. Like for a club team, this person's in charge of the reffing assignments, this person's in charge of what jersey the team wears, this person's in charge, and so just giving them different tasks as opposed to being the overarching captain of the team. But yeah, generally, I would say more often than not, I've had my teams vote. But I've definitely had some disappointment with how the votes went when, it's like 3 weeks into the season and especially a club team where it's a bunch of new kids coming together and they don't really know each other that well yet. I think it's tough for them sometimes to vote for captains because they naturally want to look to, oh, that kid hits the ball the hardest. Like, she's a stud. Like, yeah, she should be our captain. That's not what a captain is. And I think that's a really important part of the process too, is educating your team on what a captain is. These are the responsibilities of a captain. These are the qualities we want in a captain so that at least they have a little more, thinking to do instead of just, oh, that kid's the best player, so they should probably be our captain.
Yeah, it's definitely all over the place. And the challenges with the club are certainly different than they are with a high school or a college team. We've got carryover from season to season. We've got one more question that's aimed at Tod. And I'll bring that up. But do you guys have any final thoughts in terms of the motivation stuff before we get that one?
Probably the one thing that we didn't touch upon was the idea of conflict resolution, and that, beginning the season saying, hey, part of this process, part of this experience is we're going to have some conflict. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a process for addressing that conflict and doing it in an honest way. And so that when that conflict hits, that it's not surprising. It doesn't become demotivating. It's something that, hey, we talked about this. This is any team that is working, group of, 15 individuals that's working together for a goal. There are going to be some issues, and we have to address them and move on and keep getting a little bit better every day. So that's probably the one point we didn't touch on today.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just motivation-wise, there's a few things I think that are that motivate kids, and one is competition, and tied in with that is fun. You know, if they're having fun doing something, they're going to be more motivated to work hard doing that thing. And then something that's really stood out to me, we've had a couple guest speakers do Zooms with our club the last few weeks, and our kids all, you know, have question and answer just like this, and they always ask, what do you do when you're not motivated? You know, when you don't feel like going to practice, like how do you motivate yourself? And almost all of our high level players talked about, you know, it's about your team. It's about your teammates. So maybe I don't feel like, you know, going and working hard today, but I'm a part of a team and my teammates are counting on me to come, you know, contribute and make our team better, just like I count on them. So when I'm not having my best day, I always just think about how I'm doing this for my teammates. And I think bringing that up and reminding them that there's 11 other people counting on them and that they matter too, and that their behavior affects, I think, is a big thing.
All right, Todd. Ruth wants to know, and you kind of already, I think, addressed this a little bit. How have you changed your coaching style, and when did you make that adjustment? You just talked about 20 years ago, no longer yelling at teams after the match. Is there anything else in there?
Yeah, I think one thing, I think I've changed a lot. I mean, when I started 40 years ago, we were in a different, you know, it was different coaching climate. I coached like I was coached, and I was coached in a, you know, my freshman basketball coach was an ex-Marine, and we were junior Marines. And so that's how I was, you know, that's how I was coached. And when I was, you know, I coached basketball before I coached volleyball, and the best basketball coach at the time was Bobby Knight. You know, I mean, so those models that we had, you know, 40 years ago are much different than what we have now. So my style has definitely evolved, and you know, I think it evolves all the time. That's why I can still have fun doing it, because I'm trying to get better all the time. So, but I think one of the biggest things for me is when I started coaching in high school, we didn't have club. So the kids would play 3 months a year, and it was kind of a race for reps. And so if I could give kids a bunch of good reps and be super efficient in practice, I could get them better because they touch the ball more. Now I'm much more, my role as a high school coach, I'm much more of a manager. You know, the kids are playing 12 months a year, and I see myself as not a race for reps anymore. I have to work with them to make sure that they stay healthy, and that's, you know, physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy. All of those are much different priorities than I had when I started, and I was just saying, hey, we have to serve and pass more balls.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you both. This was fun. Thanks, everybody, for turning up and for putting in the questions.
Thanks, John. Jess, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me.